We're recording.
Hello.
Hello.
So welcome, I guess, to, fuck authority.
Yeah. Out on an Island, episode 2. This week we're discussing the all-encompassing topic of punk rock, which is fuck authority. I guess that is the very basic core principle of all sects and genres of punk rock that are current in this day and age.
Yeah, and what we're really going to try to focus on today is like punk rock ethics, punk rock ethos, punk rock ethical extrapolation. I don't know.
There's lots of ways to say it, I guess.
So how was your week?
It was all right. Little personal note, am leaving the country in about 3 days. And so it's been a little wild when you work remote and you work for a nonprofit. It's kind of like, I'm going to be out of the country. And then they're like, okay, we'll do all of these things before you leave then. And so it's been wild. Little known fact, I also paint houses on a small scale basis these days, but when I'm not doing grant writing. And so this has, it collided. My worlds collided.
Yeah, you had a lot of jobs for both this week.
I had meetings and then painting and then meetings. It was a wild week. What about you? How's your week?
It was actually kind of cruise. I've been looking at like some big life decisions for the future. I'm on the academic job market, and I don't know how much longer like I want to be on the academic job market, but like there's other things that are right in front of me, which is they've really aligned with my plan B. So if I didn't make academia work, I wanted to do like contract work and things that would allow me to travel and have freedom. And
sure, yeah, that digital nomad lifestyle, it's sweet. It's a sweet lifestyle.
Yeah, it really is. And like that's the stuff that's in front of my face. And so it's like, am I gonna kill myself and get like disheartened or disillusioned for another year if things don't work out? Like we're in the middle of the application cycle, so I'm still waiting to hear from a lot of things for first round and second round interviews. But if it doesn't work out, like I don't want to do it again.
It's so wild that like I guess it's a good reminder too that like you can be a PhD, like you can do all the work and like it's still like there's still a ladder to climb beyond that. That's wild to think about.
Yeah, there is no job at the end of the rainbow. I mean, some jobs are different if you get into different programs. Like I have a friend who, when she graduated with her medical degree, she was in a program that paid for med school. And as long as she took like a 2-year term commitment wherever they sent her, like she would not owe any money for her degree. But like we don't have a program like that.
Sure, yeah.
I feel like everyone should have a program like that.
Yeah, I mean that feels medical specific, I guess, like they rate your job in importance or something. I don't know. I mean, they're all pretty fucking important.
I think so.
Cool.
So any like current events? I know there was something we were talking about earlier that you wanted to bring attention to, like that's in the news right now, and I think it's really important. So do you want to?
Yeah, I can elaborate on that a little bit. So there's a really interesting thing happening here in Hawaii right now. If you listen to our first episode, then you'll know that we are based out of the state of Hawaii. We are on the big island of Hawaii, but what's currently happening in the state is the island of Oahu is facing a water crisis. We have World War II tanks at the top of a place called Red Hill, which is essentially in a military base. And those tanks have been contaminated by fuel from the military. And they are ancient. They're ancient tanks. There's no reason why they couldn't have been updated since World War II. But, except money and not wanting to do the work. And so now that is literally leaking into the population.
Yeah, so I'm confused because is it the jet fuel in the tanks that's leaking into the water supply, or is it water tanks that have jet fuel leaking into them?
I believe that it's the water tanks that are just old and are now absorbing fuel from like other tanks that are stored nearby because the whole facility is outdated. So the tanks every tank, even where the fuel is stored, are very unstable. So with that, Hawaii just passed a lawsuit against the military, essentially saying that like, you poisoned us, you poisoned our water, our kids. There's been numerous accounts of lawsuits filed for people who were ending up in the hospital with horrible skin disorders, people who couldn't breathe, people who couldn't function.
There was vomiting and nausea, and like kids are sick, pets are sick, adults are sick, like everyone is sick because they're drinking this contaminated water.
Anyone drinking water out of the tap, and Hawaii is a very great place to have county water. We have amongst the best water in the world because we use aquifers, from under the island, and like the rainwater filters through lava rock here. And so like it is amazingly fresh water. And so there's no reason why people would be getting sick from the water alone, which is how we were able to figure out so quickly that this was a fuel contamination. But
yeah, they ran a bunch of tests and stuff too, like to
the EPA
like,
got involved, man.
Yeah, and it doesn't affect all of Oahu. It only affects like the Salt Lake Red Hill area, I think is what they're saying right now.
Yeah, I think they're testing outward now though to see how far the contamination really went. But pending those results, the military actually launched like a counter lawsuit to try to block the need to flush these tanks.
Yeah, because the state was like, you need to dismantle your tanks or something. Like it was like, you need to shut these tanks down.
Yeah.
And the military was being coy for a little while, and they were like, maybe, and now they're like a hard no, like, no, this is not happening.
Important to add here too is that they never wanted to shut down the tanks at all. They were going to deny any responsibility, even though they had full knowledge that there may be leaks in their tanks to begin with. So now they're trying to countersue the state of Hawaii to say that they do not have to flush those tanks, and they would like to continue poisoning thousands of people, it seems, which is insane. You guys can find out more information about this at any news source, really. You can Google Red Hill. It'll be the first thing that comes up. But, if you are a water protector, if you are a climate advocate, this is a really important issue. If you're an Indigenous peoples advocate, this is an important issue to look into, because this is just another way that the American government moves in, colonizes, and then decides how the welfare of the people living there should commence. And that's insane that they have that power.
Yeah, one thing I want to add to that latter part is like, so the military was offering water. It was something like 10 gallons a day, I believe, per household, but it was only per military household. So even if the contamination was larger than the base in the Red Hill or Salt Lake area, or wherever they first deemed the scope, it wasn't like any citizen could go and get water. It was only for military families. And that's like, it creates another disparity. It like creates this hierarchy in the community, which again, like the military is not necessarily like an entirely welcome presence, but it further like exacerbates that divide between like people who live here and the military.
Another really fucked up thing about it too that's worth noting is that the water that they were offering, a lot of it was bottled water. So now we're talking about adding, plastics.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, they were offering a lot of bottled water to households, which is like cool. So like we're kind of fighting one problem and like exacerbating another problem on like a huge scale. Military families over the holidays were also forced to move into hotel rooms indefinitely so that they,
it's not funny, but it's like, haha.
It's funny in the sense where it's just kind of like, you fucked up so badly you have to move your own people, but like now you want to say that you like don't think that you should have to pay for that. Like, that's the American government for you. I don't know. So that brings us, that's a good segue into fuck authority, right? Like authority in all forms, I guess. I mean,
so like, what does punk rock ethics mean to you? What do you think of, like, what about it?
So I mentioned in the prior episode that one of the biggest like moral codes that I have was like instilled in me very young. And the lyrics that really stuck with me in that song were it's not enough to be a punk, you gotta be a human being. And that basically built everything about the way that I prefer to function in my life and like the way that I shaped my character. And so, like, when I think about punk rock ethics, I think, like, you know, there are so many different ways to define punk rock, and there's so much to the subculture in itself, like, so many variations in that family tree. And some of them aren't great, and some of them are super great. But I think, like, if you're going to have, like, a core statement, like, if it's not enough to be a punk, you got to be a human being is a really great, you know, like, statement to make. And so, like, when I think about it, I think beside you and your personal struggles in life and your personal values and your personal just code of ethics in general, like, you have to remember that, like, you are functioning in a society and, like, the society is fucked up. That's unfucking questionable. But, like, there you have to think like about the people around you, and like I think Red Hill is actually a really great way to like kind of think about like, man, like military families and like local families alike are getting shit on by the military.
Yeah, totally right now.
Yeah, it's a really visceral example of like how bad that really gets. Like, so that is what I think about. What does that mean to you?
So I did a very interesting thing, and I approached this topic. So part of it was procrastination, but like I approached this topic really academically, and I was thinking about like, okay, what are stereotypes about punk rock, you know, and then like what actually are punk rock ethics, and then like what are the ethics that shape me. So I had three like big questions.
That's very academia of you.
I know. I don't know what to say about that. So, like, my punk rock tradition is really like new school, and so I was, and like political new school punk bands are a big part of that. Like, it's not like I didn't like foundational punk rock, just like the sound and the audio quality really was off-putting.
That's fair, yeah. No, I mean, it was almost like to make your recording as shitty as it could be at one point. Like, the early days of black metal were the same way, you know?
Yeah.
You want it to be raw, you want it to be gross, and, like, nobody likes to hear that.
Yeah, and, like, I had friends that went out and would go to, like, a sound room and record, like, a 7-inch for, like, $80 where they're all playing in, like, a tiny box, and, like, it is what it is, and it's really cool, but, like, I don't know. I like musicianship, which new school like came from metal. Like it's a lot of like not failed, but like the metal scene had exploded in the late 80s, and so a lot of metal musicians like transferred to new school and new school punk rock because they're really similar. Like it's not thrash metal, but
I think there's like definitely a crossover. They're definitely like intersecting circles for sure. I mean, like, because music is such a wide variation and because like it's not record labels and it's not all of these things anymore, and like the internet really came into like getting your music out there. I think you can kind of be whatever the fuck you want to be these days, which is really nice. I mean, because there's tons of bands that I like that wouldn't necessarily fit one characteristic. But when you say new school, can you like give an example of like some of the bands you're into right now?
I can, and you didn't even know that I had this.
Ooh,
but
look at you.
So like in Hawaii, it's really like one thing that you do when you enter a room in Hawaiian culture is you like cite your genealogy. You like recite like who you are back to the earliest traces that you can do it. And so I actually kind of did that with punk rock. And so bands that I like are Face to Face, Propaganda, Good Riddance, and then my favorite band on paper has always been Strung Out. But like other bands that I like that aren't necessarily new school are like The Descendants and Minor Threat and Pennywise, and then like other new school international bands are the Mad Caddies, which are from Oh, they're from the US, sorry. Napalm Death, which is from the UK, and High Standard.
Napalm Death, yeah.
Yeah.
It's the birth of a, what do they call that genre? We're going to have to edit this.
Totally probably not going to edit this, but yeah, we will put it in the...
Grindcore.
Grindcore.
That is the birth and mother of grindcore, Napalm Death. I saw them live once. They were fucking incredible.
That's cool.
Yeah.
I also like High Standard, which is from Japan, and The Living End, which is from Australia. So those are just like a couple bands that when I think of new school, I know a lot of people go to NoFX. That's like primarily like a very new school band, very public, very foundational new school band, I think.
Yeah, I think like the importance to like carve out here too is like maybe this is like a third wave punk rock revival kind of like idea of bands. There's so many bands now, it's so hard to say new school because we're old already.
Yeah, well, I think it's like tattoos, right? New school as a style will never change. It just
evolves.
It evolves from there.
Yeah, that's funny. Yeah, that's true. Like old school tattoos are basically like you're gonna think like Brooklyn style, like traditional like sailor tattoos. And stuff.
Sailor Jerry, Ed Hardy.
Yeah. I struggle so much with those tattoos. Like, I love the fact that people are still getting them because they are so traditional. I definitely see badass designs all the time, but like, I don't think I could get one myself. I just want to be alternative for the sake of being alternative. I'm a hipster, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, tattoos is a whole other thing.
But yeah, we can get back to ethics here.
Yeah, okay. So punk rock to me falls into like 5 song categories across genre, whatever like you're interested in. There are the punk rock love song, the punk rock breakup song, the punk rock cover. Punk rock cover, social commentary, songs about death, and then songs about daily life. So that's 6 because I can count. Oh, and political.
That's probably the biggest
my bad.
genre of punk rock. But no, I agree with you. It is really interesting if you like trace the lineage of bands. You know, there are so many bands who have like kind of like transitioned through those genres. I think like throughout their evolution, definitely.
Yeah, I think it's more like song topic, whatever the genre is, right? Like they can talk about love, death, breakups, social commentary. Do you think there's any other social commentary, politics, and daily life?
Probably religion as well, but I mean, I think everybody's pretty like agreed on religion unless you're like into like, I don't know what like religious punk rock is. I've never tried to explore that category. I'm sure. Oh, okay. Yeah. I don't know. I struggle to call that punk rock. I mean, they were definitely like riding a wave of like pop punk.
Yeah, pop punk.
But like, shut up. I don't want to listen to those guys talk about their ideas. And that's not like from a closed state of mind. It's just kind of like, I think like a really interesting thing about punk rock, like when you're young, is that like your ethical code isn't really decided yet, you know? So like, and I understand that like a lot of punk rock like comes from being young because that's when you are young, you're idealistic, you're rebellious. And like, you know, like bands like Operation Ivy were doing that so fucking well. Jesse Michaels was such a good lyricist, you know, at 17 years old. But like, there is like a lot of, you have to like remember that like at 17, your world isn't very big. Yeah. So you're kind of just like rebelling against the only things that you know, or like praising the only things that you know. So
yeah, Operation Ivy was actually on my list of ska bands that like I like Operation Ivy. So I agree with you. Your worldview is really small at 17. And you said something when we were out hiking a couple weeks ago, and you were like, you can't be all fuck the world and oi, oi, oi forever, I think is what it was.
Yeah. I think like you definitely hit a point in adulthood. And I mean, not everybody, like, you know, your thoughts are your own and like you're entitled to like have any opinion about the world that you'd like to have. But like, I think like just through daily living, you kind of start to realize that like rebellion comes in different forms and there's different ways to be rebellious. And like at some point, like I think some of us really accept responsibility for that rebellion, and a need to back that rebellion up. Which I feel like, you and I both take that to heart very seriously.
Yeah. So on Wikipedia, because it's a totally credible source, like I was looking up what are like some stereotypical ethical beliefs, right, about what punk rock is. And so it's basically anarchy and nonconformity, anti-authoritarianism, anti-corporatism, and a DIY culture. And all of those are totally true, but it also is just such a narrow subset that it misses when you go to like, if you Google punk rock ethics, that's what you get. But if you Google punk rock ideology, you get like this whole other, like the rest of what punk rock is.
Just like the other side of the spectrum.
Yeah, the egalitarianism, the human rights and animal rights, and anti-hate, like pro-inclusion of gender equity, racial equity, health rights, civil rights, disability rights, like all of that comes up.
That's so funny. I just had to write a equality and inclusion statement for my nonprofit this morning. It was just very fresh in the brain.
Yeah. Was it punk rock?
It was not punk rock. It was agriculture. That is also important in agriculture. Punk and agriculture. No, but like I think that it is really interesting though, because like one of the main things that we really want to talk about in this podcast is like punk rock for an evolving world, because like the world is evolving so far past what we ever thought it was going to be 20 years ago, 30 years ago, even 10 years ago. There's different ways to be punk these days. There's different ways to be rebellious. And I think like when a lot of those stereotypical principles of punk rock were created, it was before there was ever like these issues always existed, but I don't think they were always as prevalent as they are right now, especially for the youth, there were definitely a lot of things that were easier to ignore when you were young, when we were young, and definitely easier to ignore when, people older than us were young. I mean, like I know the Cold War and like nuclear war and things were always like a fear, but I mean, now like with how much the internet has taken off, like cyber attacks are crazy,
Yeah.
How reliant we are on like the web is insane. And so like to be punk in an evolving world definitely takes like a revision of like what rebellion looks like. And I think that, not just punk rock culture, but youth culture in general these days is we just take a lot more responsibility for like what our actions or our opinions mean to those around us.
Yeah. There's also a crazy juxtaposition because we live in this world where considerably, like especially with digital culture, access to the internet and everything, there's less national boundaries. Like we're becoming more globalized.
Sure.
But like a fundamental like core thing of punk rock is like anti-globalization. Like how can we do this reclamation and decolonization and, respect different communities for their own individual identities, and then also get more connected and like share information, like create like a global culture. What is the balance? Like the balance is crazy.
It's really insane. I think like punk rock has always been a really great tool to transcend like culture, cultural differences. Like I remember a few years back, there was a really good movement and also just a lot in the press about how punk rockers in Indonesia were being persecuted because they had crazy haircuts. And like, the Muslim religion is, I should say Muslim extremists are moving really heavily into Southeast Asia. I am Southeast Asian. This is, something that I'm aware of just on like a personal level, but they were being detained and put into camps, essentially, where they were like buried up to their heads in mud and like sprayed with garden hoses and made to recite the Quran.
That's awful.
Yeah, I mean, and it's hard to like, imagine that still exists in the world today, especially when you come from like a first world nation and, your voice and your freedom are things that you're so entitled to. But like, I think punk rock ethics is really taking a step back from your own life and kind of just like recognizing the fact that like you're like this is your global family, you know, like we all share the common thread of like this one thing, be it music or, you know, whatever you're into, but like it really is, I think, like a really great punk standard these days to be aware of like your brothers, right? Your brothers, your sisters, your whatever you want to call them, gender aside. I think it is really important that we recognize that, you know, there is a community of people that stand with you that you've never met and you probably will meet or never will meet, you know, but like you guys are all connected by one thread and those people are worth fucking fighting for just like you're worth fighting for.
Yeah. Yeah. One thing, so like based on the current event topic that we were talking about earlier, the Red Hill stuff, like I never really equated like decolonization as like a punk rock value.
Mm-hmm.
But we've talked often about like prioritizing Indigenous voices, and then like how at punk shows like some bands are starting to do land acknowledgements, like acknowledging that like, oh, they're on foreign land or they're on stolen land, they're from stolen land, and you know that's a really important like preamble to the show. Like let's just all like acknowledge this. And I guess it wasn't until like I was looking this up, like punk rock ethics, that like I started to really try to like put it together. Is it just because it's so anti-establishment? Do you think that like decolonization is a core value or like a punk rock value? Because like I never even thought that would be like a thing.
That's a really interesting, like I said, like punk in an evolving world is really interesting, right? Because we like culture across the globe is evolving with, you know, all of the new amenities that we have as as a race in civilizations. Like I think it is really interesting to know like what people value specifically based on how they feel or the community that they're, you know, like I just listened to a really good episode of another podcast about the Milgram experiment. Do you know what that is?
Yeah. Is that the one where with the
shocking? Yeah. So that's a wild experiment. For anybody who doesn't know, the Milgram experiment was an experiment that was carried out in the 60s. And it was basically the first time that America was introduced to the idea that like it wasn't just German like genealogy or like mentality that made Nazis cruel. It was an innately human trait to take orders.
Yes, because the background of the experiment is that there are two sets of people in a room. One set of people are getting tortured, or in quotes, getting tortured, and the other set of people are in a room with someone and there's a knob and they have to like crank a shocker.
It was a board of 30 levers, I think, that they all had different voltages on them, but like the final voltage was like beyond what was safe for human like contact, you know, like.
Yeah. And so the people, not the people being tortured, they were in on the experiment, but the people on the side of the room with the levers were the subjects of the experiment, and they kept being told by an authority figure like to up the voltage on these people.
Yeah, there were 4 prods to this experiment. The first prod in the experiment and incentive for the person doing the shocking was to say, please continue. The second was the experiment requires you to continue. The third is that it's absolutely essential for you to continue. And the fourth is you have no other choice but to continue. And what we were talking about was why this kind of authoritarian like oversight of what you're doing and this like prodding, so to speak, fucks with your psychology to the extent where most people, like about 65% of the people involved in the experiment, were just following orders because they felt like they had to.
Yeah. So that takes so one of the overlooked values, I guess, of punk rock ideology is free thought. So free thought is an ideology that we are all capable to like come to our own conclusions following a logical like progression. And I think that like sometimes people get lumped together based on like ideas of conformity, and like punk rock has its own like values of conformity, especially like out of a certain era, right? You have to have a mohawk, you have to
bullshit. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. But like, what does free thought as an ideology like mean to you?
Well, I think like another really great way to like add to that question is like, what is free thought in this current world where free thought is everywhere? Because you can research anything you want and find somebody who's like-minded.
Yeah.
You know, like bubbles are endless. We're just in like an endless universe of bubbles right now where you can connect with anybody who shares any mentality that you share.
Chemtrails.
Yeah, exactly. Chemtrails, or like what are the flat earthers? That's a fucking wild one, you know? I mean, and it's really interesting, I think, the way that the world is evolving, because like sometimes it seems like being alternative is just for the sake of being alternative, like without any conclusion or any logic behind it, without any study. It is just for the sake of playing for your team, is how I would describe it, you know, to put it simply. But like, it is really interesting because like, what is free thought in like a world with like unlimitless or like limitless knowledge, right? Like,
so that's a really good question. So I have a philosophy behind that, just because I look at my job as a professor as teaching someone how to think, right? I'm not telling them what to think.
mm-hmm.
I try really hard to not tell people what to think. But there's a whole bunch in there. I have my own thoughts. I have my own beliefs. And to try to not impart that on students can be like a monumental task, right? Because you have to limit your sarcasm. Like, what if someone says something and like the whole class laughs? Like, how do you remedy that? Like, it's like, okay, well, let's explore what you said. Like, it's okay that you don't know maybe like how to develop like a good research question. Like, that's not something that's laughable. Like, let's walk you through how to do it, you know? So I have a sticker in my office that says like, think it's not illegal yet. It's so like punk rock cliche.
Sure.
But I really do look at my job as telling them how to think and not telling them what to think. So like, what tools can I impart to you to make like a rational deduction to analyze your world, analyze your beliefs, or analyze like something that you're interested in, with also not imparting like my own ideology or beliefs like about that thing. One really good example of that came up was this student wrote a paper. I like magical realism.
Sure.
Okay, so magical realism is like, it's literature usually that takes place in a setting, and literature includes text, video, music, anything. So it's literature that takes place in a real world setting, but incorporates different like magical elements. Like the second like a spirit enters like the door right now, right? This becomes a magical realism sort of situation.
Sure.
So this student wrote this paper about how this one book that I just absolutely love, like, is not magical realism. And I critiqued the paper to shit, but I gave them an A because how they got there was really logical. Like, they were able to point to fact. They were fact meaning excerpts of the book.
Sure, they were able to cite.
Yeah, they were able to say, like, okay, this is what I'm using from the actual story. We were taking a new criticism perspective. A new criticism perspective means that everything comes from within the text. Nothing comes outside of the text. And they were able to show that, like, no, this story is not magical realism, it's cultural belief. And just that analysis was just like so phenomenal. Like, that's teaching someone how to think. Like, you're giving them all the tools and all, like, this is what the information is, and they're able to integrate that into something that is their own. So it's like teaching them how to think and not what to think. Like, you don't have to believe that this book is magical realism, but can you prove to me that it's not?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's like really phenomenal in terms of like teaching. As mentioned in the last episode, I'm a high school dropout, and I guess I should give some background on why I dropped out of high school.
Ooh, yeah.
I grew up in the public schools in Hawaii, and like I mentioned in our last episode, when I was growing up in high school in the early 2000s, it was definitely very like kind of textbook teaching. It wasn't, you know, highly based on anything contrary to like what the standard curriculum of like what education was at the time. So I actually had a class that was about government. They asked us to write a paper on what we thought the like perfect form of government would be between like communism, socialism, capitalism, you know, like all of these really standard ideas of like what government is in the world right now.
Not egalitarianism.
Hawaii. We weren't there yet. Let's put it that way. So like, being that I was like a punk rock kid, you know, I wrote a paper on like anarchy, you know, and what anarchy would look like. And to do that, I cited Utopia by Sir Thomas More, because essentially that, I mean, I guess that reigns a lot in communism as well, but there were very like anarcho principles to that, as well as like Leo Tolstoy had a lot of like anarcho principles to like his Christianity at the time. Forever, that's what he's known for. But my teacher returned that paper to me with a D, saying that like I wasn't really trying, you know, because that wasn't really a real thing. And that's why I dropped out of school. I called my parents and I was like, I'm done here. This is ridiculous, you know, like, and it was the impending like idea that I was not going to be able to critically think because it didn't fit a standard that made me think like, so I'm fucking better off without this, you know?
Yeah.
And luckily, you know, my parents, they told me like, if you weren't going to go to school, you're going to get a job. And that's what I did. And that's what I've been doing ever since. And it led me to where my job is now, which is a lot of critical thinking. So like, I'm really grateful for that. But like, you know, just you speaking as somebody who does educate, like that is a huge thing. Like even I think for teachers to have to break that mold of like what education is, you know, because education pertains to a standard.
Yeah. If like we had the perfect time, this is such a big tangent, but like we had the perfect time during the pandemic to really halt education, retool education standards, and then redevelop an educational curriculum that was geared more toward like thinking and like skills that people would need, as opposed to like this standardized like in 1895 who wrote a very influential story.
Yeah, sure.
Who the fuck cares who wrote an influential story? Like what is, and it's even geared toward a Western perspective, because like in 1895, like I want to say like the overthrow was happening, or like the
yeah, that's right.
Yeah, so like it seems like that would be more,
well, it was a little bit past, but yeah,
like the tensions were brewing and stuff. But like, yeah, like we really missed an opportunity with now this 2-year like downtime. Not like people aren't going to school, but like we really could have like fixed some shit. Like my dream job would be Secretary of Education, and I would literally halt everything. If students wanted to get degrees and wanted to pass, they could take exams to do so, but we would take a year to like retool everything to like a curriculum that fit like the people who are here today. And the people who are going through the education system today, like have mental illness, like can't afford food, like, and if you don't have these problems, that's awesome for you. But like many people going through the K-12 system like can't afford a pencil. There was just riots at like a school where 6 people went to jail and 20 more were arrested, like here locally in Pahoa. Like, just, I don't know, there's so much we could have done to retool education for the world we live in today, and we didn't take advantage of that.
I think like a lot of it comes down to like, you know, I mean, like I understand, especially with the pandemic, because the pandemic was so tricky for a lot of people. And like, I think it like more than anything brought about a lot of people's like mental health issues that maybe they weren't aware of because it was a total shift in reality. But I do think that it is, you know, a really interesting, demonstration of exactly what was wrong, right? Because like even the nonprofit that I work for, we are heavily built on the ideas of youth education and integrating youth into agricultural, the agricultural industry, because that does not exist as well as it should in Hawaii for all of the resources that we have.
Yeah.
But even through the pandemic, like the biggest thing that my organization did was like a pivot into like community outreach, because we realized that like there was so much more that like needed attention beyond like just converting youth into like idea of like agriculture and like how that can be like a profitable career for you. You know, that was like what we kind of started on, and just realizing that like, you know, sustainable agriculture is important to this island, and that like we can definitely build a sustainable economy and food system built on that. But like it was just more about like, man, there's a lot of people in trouble, you know?
Yeah.
And like I think like when you talk about punk rock ethics, like that is kind of a fundamental basis of it, you know, is like being able to step back, like I said earlier, and just like really look at like, man, there's a lot of problems, and like there's a lot of different solutions and a lot of people who can provide solutions, but like how willing are you to like explore solutions, right? Like obviously like a lot of people were not willing to explore solutions when they had downtime to explore solutions. And I know that a lot of people went through a lot during the pandemic, but like there was certainly time and there was certainly space to explore.
Definitely. So like I said earlier, like I took this topic and I approached it like super academically. And so one of the things that I did was I wanted to spend some time really reaching back into my youth, and like I still like I immersed myself in like a whole bunch of different punk rock that I don't spend a lot of time with like this week, like Jello Biafra and the Queers, like some of my favorite bands that are still making music today. And I just kind of sat with them and I really tried to think about like what were the top 5 lyrics. So we went over like different punk rock genres earlier. So
definitely.
Yeah. So what are the top 5 lyrics that shaped my value system from like 14 to 19? And I only really wanted to focus on political and social commentary songs, because like everybody loves a good punk rock love song, like, and everybody loves a good punk rock breakup song. Like, I feel like
it's kind of the beauty of being young. I feel like, you know, like you get to kind of be reckless with love and like breakups. That's pretty punk rock all the time.
I think so, yeah. And like you can internalize different values from that too. But I wanted to really critically analyze what people talked about that like for political and social commentary that like I internalized. And you said something right now that really resonated with me. And it is a line from a Face to Face song called No Authority. And I would like to read you these lyrics and then kind of like discuss them maybe. So it's it's like basically a verse. There are those of us who just sit back and never try. There are those of us who just sit back and wonder why. We live by consequences. We never seem to get it right. Conflict of circumstances. And sometimes we might lose a fight. So like that, because you were like, we had this whole pandemic and some people just kind of like didn't act. There was no action. And like So for me, that lyric is one that was like, well, I don't want to just sit back and be like, why are things this way? Like, this was kind of like a big call to action song. Like, there's nothing super political about it. Like, a lot of my other ones, they're basically like, fuck the system. Our song, like, our episode title is Fuck Authority, you know? Like,
titular role.
Yeah, very. But, like, I never wanted to just sit there and let life happen and wonder, like, why are things this way? Like, and so, okay, so I'm going to get up and try, but I'm not going to get discouraged because sometimes we're going to lose. And you know what? That's okay. It's like a learning lesson. Like, all of this came from this small little verse in this punk rock song, you know? And
definitely.
Like, yeah, yeah.
I feel like, you know, for me, like, lyrics always hold so much weight. Like, as I mentioned, like, I am a grant writer, and like language, we were just discussing while we were on a break from recording about like the importance and like the power of language, and like what language can do to alter somebody's perception on like a subject with the right words, you know? And I feel like that is a really interesting topic because it is really like punk rock is always incredible because the simplicity of it carries a lot of weight. So like, you know, you are using like very sing-songy lyrics there because, you know, they rhyme, but like, you know, I mean, it is like a really interesting thing to be able to write something that is so simplistic, but that carries so much weight and that relates to you so heavily as a human being, despite there being a lot to the imagination or like interpretation of what that person's art really means, or like the way they felt when they were writing those lyrics. I think like the beautiful thing about simplicity in punk rock lyrics is that there isn't a lot of interpretation. They're very straightforward, you know?
Yeah.
And Fuck Authority has become this like reigning battle cry for punk rock because that is a general synopsis, like regardless of like what the characteristics of your rebellion look like, that we all kind of agree on. I think punk in an evolving world and like punk rock ethics definitely at this point for me revolve around like the world moves fast now.
Yeah.
And at incredible speed, and like you need to move quickly too. Like, you know, the pandemic was an incredible amount of stalled out time for a lot of people, and not for everybody. You know, some people were extremely busy and trying, you know, just to cope with that. But like for those that it was stalled out, you know, it like was a really good time for like reflection in simplistic ways, you know, to kind of look at the direction of your life and say, well, like, what is going on, you know, and like society as a whole, wherever your society may be, you know, there was a lot of reflection time in there to say, like, what is going on? Where do I fit into what's going on? How would I like to see this changed? Am I capable of changing this? I think that like we all are in some small way, you know, just altering like, you know, like I think a really good example is like a lot of people put on weight during the pandemic. A lot of people decided to be really healthy during the pandemic, you know, like all of those kinds of things were like small reflections of like the time given and like the ability to do something with that time.
Yeah, we're not saying there's no judgment.
No, definitely not. You know, like you are perfect the way that you are. You make your own decisions for your life. There's nothing wrong with any decision that you make as long as you're not hurting anybody around you. But it's definitely like a point where I think we were all given time to make choices and reflect, and you know what you were able to do at that time. And like I don't think that has to stop with the pandemic, you know, kind of coming to easement, or, you know, kind of like winding down if that's the way we're headed. But like definitely like the mentality of just like thinking about like, you know, when I had time, I thought about myself, I thought about my place, I thought about like my position in history, and where do I want to move forward with that, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think those are really good considerations. I had a meeting with someone today. Today is a Saturday, by the way. And both Diz and me, Alicia, whatever you want to call me, Aloysius, whatever, Uncle Al.
Brother Al.
Brother Al. Diz and I both had a really busy Saturday, like work busy. And in my work today, I had a meeting with somebody, and we did get to talking about the shift in the pandemic because we went online in the middle of the semester, and we made very different choices. And my choice was the less stressful. I put all of my classes online asynchronous because I had students moving from one localized community. We were doing face-to-face classes. We were then dispersed all over the world. Some people were in abusive home situations. Some had class at what would be like 3, 4 in the morning their time. So I decided to make it asynchronous and just do meetings. My colleague decided to try to do synchronous classes, and it was very stressful, but I admire everyone who did and still continues to try to do synchronous classes. I did them last semester. So synchronous is they meet online, but they're at a specific time, and everyone has to be there live at that time. My colleague was explaining to me today that the first year and a half of the pandemic, they felt they gave and gave and gave and were so exhausted, and like they were totally neglecting themselves. And like, but because of our friendship, they looked to me as a model of self-care and how to prioritize yourself and like look for what boundaries are, like and really reframe like your priorities, what is important. And so this semester they are doing way more of that, and like so their health and their family has become more of a priority than it was like job focused, and like what are these people going to think of me kind of focused, you know. And
sure.
Yeah. And just I really appreciated like hearing that in real time, that like even though it's taken a year and a half, this person is finally starting to like prioritize themselves.
I think like a shift in mindset is so incredible with the time allowed to you. And I'd like to remind everybody that like your life is the time allowed to you, you know?
Yeah.
To like really focus on these things, you know, like you can be an activist and you can fight every fucking day for what you believe in. And that is a great fucking use of your time. But like, it's also a good use of your time to remember yourself and remember that you're only a animal on this planet. And, you know, I think like when it comes down to like ethics, like definitely explore your place in the world because that's important, but like don't forget that it is you as well, you know. Like I think like that's definitely what your like colleague is starting to understand, is like you have all this time to educate these people and like to like do the best that you can fucking do, but like you can't really do that if you're not doing so well yourself, you know, like you're exhausted all the time. And that's another huge part of punk rock ethics, I think, is to like, you know, not put yourself first, but like put yourself in the equation somewhere.
Yeah, you definitely need to take care of you. I mean, in the stereotypes of punk rock, it feels like putting yourself first is really selfish. How can I destroy the system? Fuck the system, nonconformity, tear it all down, burn it down.
Mm-hmm,
like
definitely.
But that's not all there is when you look at like outside those stereotypes. It's like, what am I giving? How am I showing up? Like, it's very punk rock to take care of yourself as a person and like engage in self-care.
I mean, you know, like to be cliche about it, but like what kind of warrior are you if you're like not up to par, you know, and if you're not strong, if you're not like ready to like go into a fight, like you're not going to do a very good job, you know, like no matter what kind of fight that is, you know, like you still need to remember that like look outward, but like focus inward for like what your ability is to do for those around you, because that's important too. If you're exhausted, you're not doing a good job fighting for those around you.
No, and those around you will really advocate for you taking that time. Like they should, and if they're not, that's okay too. But you should look at why. Maybe
I feel like that is how you build community. You know, like I mean, that is why. To call back to what we were talking earlier about in these episodes, like we need to remember there is a global community built around people who care about other people, you know, and like people who care about themselves enough to know that they have to care about other people. And punk rock ethics is very much a fundamental core value of caring about human beings, inclusive of yourself.
Yeah,
totally.
So with that, so we're going to move into shout outs, and I want to give a shout out to Shauna Potter's book, Making Spaces Safer. So Shauna Potter is the lead singer of War on Women, which is a punk rock band. They are currently touring, and her book, Making Spaces Safer, is a book for any activist or person that's interested in social justice and how to apply different principles and techniques to the worlds and spaces that you occupy to make them safer for an inclusive community participation and protection of all members.
That's awesome.
So remember, we would like to do a land acknowledgement that to remind everyone we are in the state of Hawaii and we are on stolen land. The Queen Liliuokalani called a truce so that her people stop dying, and America is here without a treaty.
And we really like to acknowledge the fact that we realize that we ourselves are immigrants from different parts of the world who are occupying stolen land, and that there are things that we can do to help people in the fight to win rights back to their land.
Yes. And finally, fuck authority. There's tons of songs you can see in our podcast with the title, or in our playlist called Fuck Authority. I drew from Pennywise. Awesome. Well, thank you.
Have a good night, everybody.